Aloha, it's CreativeNameToStandOut again with another battle report. This time I'm bringing you a game between my Pirate Legion and an opponent's combined forces of Stormcast Eternals and Sylvaneth Treefolk. We'll be playing a mission that we just made up. I think it was very successful. The mission's pretty simple. It's a capture control mission. My opponent has 3 terrain features on the board that he chose to be his capture and control points. He can deploy any of his units within these terrain features. Anything he can't fit or he just chooses to hold in reserves will go in reserves. And when he rolls for the reserves, if they come on the board, they can come on any board edge. Meanwhile, I will have to split my forces in half. I brought 6 battle scrolls, so I'll be deploying 3 on the board and 3 in reserve. And these units that are deployed on the board can deploy anywhere just outside of 12 inches from one of these terrain features. So it will be possible for me to get a first turn charge, but it's not going to be a given unless I have like a super fast unit, which as you can see here, I have some Dragon Ogres that are kind of fast, but then the warriors themselves are average movement, and so they will probably have about an average charge. So with deployment out of the way, we go into the game, and my opponent wins the roll-off for first turn. So again, the mission is to capture more control points than your opponent does. So first turn, you can see here, my opponent actually abandons the closest terrain feature, which is probably a good idea. You don't want to get jumped if you can avoid it. And then he doesn't completely abandon the 3rd terrain feature on the far right, but he does bring his prosecutors forward so you can start shooting with them. So as you can see, the Forces of Order had a pretty short turn, and we go into my turn. And the first thing I'm going to do is use Kekus to cast Bolt of Change into those Liberators. And I do pretty well. I end up doing 3 mortal wounds, which will give me 3 chances to roll 4 up. And sure enough, I do. And so I turn one of his casualties into a spawn. So it's a free model on the board. I know all models are free, but this is an additional model I didn't bring to my list. And this is just going to boost my cause because I was going to send my Dragon Ogres into that unit anyways, and this just gives me more confidence to do so. Whether that's a good idea or not, we'll see later on. So I make the charge, and as you can see, in doing so, I also capture the terrain piece because I have 1 model to a 0, and we jump into combat. I, of course, choose to strike with my Dragon Ogres first. I end up doing 4 wounds, killing off the first 2 of these Liberators. He then strikes with his Liberators into my spawn, doing 3 wounds, which is pretty good. And then I attack with my spawn. He doesn't do anything. That's not surprising. He's not very good. He's just kind of like a free model there. And then he strikes with his Relictor, splitting his attacks and actually hitting with everything. So he finishes off the spawn and does 2 wounds to my Dragon Ogre. So after that, I was really hoping to get the next turn. You can never count on that, but I realized too late that I put those Dragon Ogres in a pretty bad spot. Sure, I'd go in there and do some damage, but since I'm now surrounded by all of those Stormcast Eternals, they're probably going to be hurting pretty soon, if not completely gone next turn. Unfortunately, as you can see here, I did not get the next turn, and we see the Treefolk coming on in from reserves. Now, we did say that they had to move on to reserves, so that's as far as they could move, because we took their movement into account, and so they're going to have to charge from there. And here's an overlook of the board as we go into the rest of his turn. I thought my opponent was being pretty aggressive with these prosecutors, and I see why. He slowed him to the top of the hill so he could take some pot shots at my sorcerer. So he was trying to assassinate him. I need to be careful where I'm putting him and be cognizant that, in this new game, these are things you can do. You can go try to assassinate the general, so you have to be pretty sure, pretty aware of where everything is on the board at all times. Luckily, I escaped with just 1 wound. It could have been worse, I'm sure. We then move into combat, and that Lord Celestin on Dracoth just plows into the Dragon Ogres. And the thing is just a beast. I can't believe how killy this thing is. I think he ends up doing 12 wounds. I'm lucky to even have this last Dragon Ogre alive, especially when you consider that after I happened to manage to kill one of his own Liberators, the Liberator and the Lord Relictor move in to contribute their attacks, and they only managed to do 1 wound. So I'm really lucky there. But this unit's pretty much worthless. A Dragon Ogre with only 1 wound. I'm going to maybe try to run away, but I think I'm just going to cut my losses and just leave him there, and hopefully I can do another wound to that Lord Relictor or whatnot. So that's pretty much it, and we move into my next turn. We see my reserves on the board, and now we'll talk about my game plan. Now that I see everything on the board, I have an idea what I want to do. I wasn't sure really at this point. So I'm going to try to take the center and upper left terrain piece. I left my halberds back because I wasn't sure if it was worth exposing them to maybe that Lord Dracoth early in the game without having an idea of what I wanted to do as far as the overall objectives. And it helped me out in 2 ways. One, it saved them from being killed right away, and 2, it might have, I don't know what my opponent's game plan was, but it might have contributed to the fact that he deployed over there. And with those failed charges, now his reserves are not really in a position to help out, especially if I start moving forward, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to hop the fence, and I'm going to try to take those 2 terrain pieces. Also, as I try to take these pieces with just sheer amount of numbers, I will gradually be moving my hordes down to the lower right terrain piece, just in case things get a little overwhelming for my opponent and he needs to pull off those, I think the Retributors, and help out the center combats. If he does that and then near the end of the game things are looking close, maybe those hordes can slip in there for the win. I do start declaring some charges here, and the one thing I didn't plan, but I don't think it would have changed anything, was I didn't realize how far away my charges were going to be. Even coming from that board edge, what I thought was going to be a pretty simple charge ended up being about a 10-inch charge, and just lucky on my part, I managed to get 1 unit in. So they swarm the hill. I believe these are my double-handed weapon guys, and then my halberds charge those prosecutors, really expecting to bring them down pretty fast. Moving on to combat, we have my warriors swarm the hill. I only end up killing 1 of the liberators and doing a wound to the other. They're in a very good defensive position, and it was hard to get any wounds through, even though I have a lot of attacks. We then move on to the choice for my opponent, which was the Lord Relictor against the Dragon Ogre, and he ends up finishing off the Dragon Ogre. I, of course, move into the Prosecutors with my halberd-wielding warriors. They kind of disappoint there. I kill off 2 of the Prosecutors, but I'm stuck with this last guy. He ignores the Battle Shock test. Not that he would have failed it, but he ignores them completely because of the Lord Celestin's command ability. We then have him strike back. I don't think he actually did any wounds to my halberds, and maybe 1 to my warriors. So in the game of Attrition, I'm definitely going to win this, but he's going to have a chance to respawn now. The Forces of Order win the roll-off for the next turn, and the first thing he does is cast Lightning Storm on these warriors, but lucky for me, those shields give me a 5-up against all mortal wounds, and I was able to save enough where I only took 1 wound on a warrior. Otherwise, my opponent shows what he was really doing by deploying over on that far left corner. He was just putting himself in the woods so that his tree men could teleport across the board if he needed to. And sure enough, there's a lot of good things that can happen if he gets him over there, and he teleports the tree man all the way across the board to where you see him in front of the horrors. Meanwhile, he moves his Lord Celestant to help reinforce the last of the prosecutors. And then we go in the shooting phase, where we see the prosecutor kill off 1 of my warriors, and the tree man shoots his roots through the ground and kills off a couple of my horrors, well, half of my horrors actually. So things are looking way different than I thought they would develop, and we'll see how combat goes. The Lord Relictor and the final Liberator of the unit that was near him charge into the hill. The Lord Celestant on Dracoth tries to help out that last prosecutor against the halberds, and then finally the tree man charges the horrors. When we go into combat, he starts off with his Lord Celestant and only kills off 2 warriors. I, in return, take the hill, and I end up killing 1 of his injured Liberators, the final Liberator from that other unit, and I put a wound on his Lord Relictor. He then moves on, I think, to some other he doesn't go straight to the tree man. He just goes to these other units that don't really generate a lot of wounds at all, if any at all, I should say. He then goes to the tree man, really whiffs it there. I still have my horrors left, and then I don't really do much to him until we get to the halberd combat, and even there I only put 1 wound on that prosecutor, and I do a couple to the Lord Celestant on Dracoth, but he can explode any time and probably wipe them out. So here's an overview of the board, and as you can see, things are temporarily looking pretty good for me, as no one owns this bottom left terrain feature, and in the upper right you can see that his paladins had abandoned it already, getting ready to reinforce the center, and as of right now I have more models on that center piece of terrain, so I do control it. Here we have a view of what it looks like after I move. You can see that I've abandoned the tree man fight, having my horrors already start heading down towards where those paladins came from, and then I'm moving in my last unit of warriors to help support the hill. Over here, my sorcerer swoops in and steals a terrain feature, and then I come up with the idea that it might be possible for me to wait out the clock. And by that I mean, if I, as you can see here, change my mind and rather support the hill, charge the tree man, I could possibly pin the tree man in place to the point where he'll take him the rest of the game, hopefully, to kill all my guys. And the same thing applies to the Lord Dracoth over there with the halberds, that at the end of the game, he may be winning these battles, but I might be able to out-attrition him here on the hill, and at the very least, own this piece of terrain with my sorcerer. So that's my new game plan now, and we'll see how it goes. And it actually starts off really good. As you can see in this combat, I do kill off that last prosecutor. He then rolls very well with his Lord Celestant into my warriors, but then I roll some clutch saves thanks to Mystic Shield, and it looks like, despite the fact that he rolled really well, that I might be able to pull this off in the Attrition style as long as I keep on giving them these boosts to the armor saves. As far as the other battles are concerned, even though I'm not necessarily winning them, they are going in my favor in the sense that wounds aren't being inflicted on either side, and as long as that happens, I can win at the end of the game just by having more models on terrain features. We roll off to see who gets the next turn, and unfortunately the Stormcast Eternals do once again, and this is where we see the Treekin reinforcements actually start to play a role in the game. So they move up, as you can see here, to support that Lord Celestant, and then the Paladins are also moving towards the hill. With no shooting really to speak of, except for that tree man attack, which I don't think does anything, we go into combat. And I'm pretty confident about this combat, even though I'm really overwhelmed. I do have that Mystic Shield up, and I have a pretty good armor save here. So we go to this combat first, and things just turn against me. I guess I just don't roll terribly well. I mean, it is a lot of attacks, and so I do lose a lot, but a lot more than I thought. Meanwhile, on the hill, the situation is getting pretty bad. With the help of the Paladin reinforcements, he's able to bring my numbers down, which was my only advantage. And even though our model count is equal, having a character and those Paladins is not so equal. So the only good thing is that the Tree Man battle is going my way. I am inflicting wounds on him, so he's getting worse. And he's also fluffing his attacks. So it looks like I'm going to win this, and hopefully that will free up my warriors fast enough so they can help the hill. Had I had more warriors, I most certainly would have cast Mystic Shield again, but being that there's only one left, I go with a Bolt of Change, get it off, kill off some Dryads, and make another spawn. I love this spell so much. So when the spawn pops up, I think this may be effective. It could keep those Dryads from pushing forward, and I'm trying to burn out the clock, so whatever I can do, I'll take it. So here we have in the game something that's very cinematic for me. I'm rolling dice, I'm having fun, but this point in the game conjures some images that just make the game extremely engaging for me. We see these heavily armored paladins with giant hammers in hand rushing up this hill. And as they're doing that, my warriors are distracted by these liberators, the last few survivors who are forming this desperate shield wall against all these attacks coming from all around with my warriors. And as these paladins are making up the hill, they catch maybe a warrior or two by surprise and just smash them aside with these hammers. And by the time they make it to the summit of the hill, you have some warriors, the second line of warriors, realize what's happening from behind, and they prepare themselves. And as that first paladin reaches the summit, he swings his hammer in a giant arc, and being the warriors are very skilled themselves in combat, one ducks down and kind of swings upwards with an axe and hits a weak point, and the pain puts the paladin at pause, giving enough time for that banner bearer there to bring down this wickedly sharp hammer into the skull of the helmet. And I don't know, this is what makes the game engaging, these little events that you can just imagine. Anyways, we move on to the Treekin battle. Again, he whiffs. I continue to do wounds to him, so he's going to get even worse, and he's still whiffing. So it looks like I am going to win this. As we begin turn 5, you can see that the Lord Celestant did finish off the last warrior. We do see the spawn survive through all the Dryad attacks, thereby pinning them in place, keeping them from swarming the hill for another turn, which is really good. The Branch Wraith is also pinned there. Speaking of which, the Branch Wraith does create more of the Dryads. We move on to the Lord Relictor, who casts Lightning Storm at my Sorcerer Lord, only doing 1 wound, thankfully. Then we see movement across the board from up top. And then we go in the shooting phase, where unfortunately the lightning spitting Dracoth kills off my Sorcerer Lord, taking away that terrain piece from me. Oh wow, I take that back. I didn't actually, I must have forgot. His Branch Wraith summoned more Dryads at some point in the game, and he retreated with the larger group of Dryads and left the smaller group with my spawn. So I didn't actually slow him down too much since he was able to retreat. That's too bad. We go into the charges, and since he killed off the Sorcerer Lord with his Lightning Spit, he's able to send his Dracoth into the warriors on the hill, and he just demolishes them. Not a single one lives. So here we begin Pyre Legion turn 5, and as you can tell, things have turned dramatically against me. I don't own a single terrain piece, and my opponent is pretty much just mopping up. The spawn does survive another round of combat. The Tree Man actually connects and does some massive damage to my warriors. We move on to turn 6, where the Paladins intercept the Horrors. We have his single units consolidating on top of some terrain. His Dryads move on to this last piece of terrain, and we move into combat where his Lord Relictor quashes any hope that I could win at least one battle. We move on to turn 6, and he kills off this spawn, and here's an overview of the board. And despite the fact that you see some orange models on the table, I actually got tabled this turn, so it was an utter defeat for me. Overall, it was a very fun game, though. I really enjoyed it. I am very satisfied with the scenario we came up with. Maybe this scenario exists in some form somewhere in one of the books, but otherwise, we just kind of came up with it on the fly, and it would be a total coincidence if that was the case. So I do enjoy this scenario. I hope to play it again. Now that we both have a feel for it, I'm sure we can have a lot of fun with this, at least tactically, I would say. And overall, again, I'm very satisfied. So I hope you appreciated this battle report. I know I haven't put one out in a while, but I do have some battle reports lined up. I hope to get them out as soon as I have the time. And again, I always appreciate you guys' likes and subscriptions. Feel free to comment below, and I'll see you next time.